You thought you could trap me here? My mother-in-law, Nancy, laughed as the flames engulfed what she thought was my passport. Think again, Dana. Your escape plan is ashes now. I guess you forgot one thing, Nancy, I replied, my voice steady with hidden calm. You can never outsmart a linguist. Nancy and Derek, my husband, exchanged panicked glances, having finally underestimated me. I had just returned home after several months abroad for work, filled with excitement to reunite with Derek. The house felt oddly quiet when I stepped through the door. Derek, I'm home, I called out, expecting to see him round the corner with a smile. Instead, he walked in slowly, eyes on his phone, barely lifting his head to acknowledge me. His nonchalance felt like a bucket of cold water. You're back, he said flatly, pocketing his phone. The flight okay? It was fine, I said, trying to keep the mood light. I missed you. Yeah, well, I've been busy, he replied, his tone harsh. Work's been a nightmare. I nodded, trying to brush off his coldness. Let's have dinner and catch up, I suggested, hoping a meal would ease the tension. We sat down to eat, and I shared stories about my trip, but Derek barely participated. Every few minutes, he would glance at his phone, replying to texts. The clinking of his utensils seemed louder than usual, like a countdown to something I couldn't see coming. But can't you put that away while we eat? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Derek slammed his fork down, glaring at me. Do you even care about anything other than your career? You've been gone for months, Dana. Months. Do you know how selfish that is? His words stung, the anger in his voice cutting deeper than I expected. I was working, Derek. It's not like I was on a vacation. This is my job. Yeah, your job, he scoffed. What about your husband? What about your family? I felt tears welling up but fought them back. I'm doing this for us, Derek. For our future. Sure you are, he muttered under his breath before standing up and leaving the room. Dinner ended in silence. I cleared the dishes, each clatter echoing in the quiet house. My excitement had turned into a knot in my stomach. What had happened to the man I married? Later that evening I found Derek in the living room, his phone glued to his hand again. I sat down beside him, trying once more to bridge the growing gap between us. I know things have been hard, I started softly, but we can work through this. We just need to communicate better. Communicate? He echoed, almost laughing. You're the one who left, remember? And now you want to talk? Before I could respond, his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his face lighting up in a way it hadn't for me all evening. Sorry, I need to take this, he said, getting up and walking away without another word. I sat there, feeling the weight of his words and the loneliness creeping in. Something was deeply wrong, and I had no idea how to fix it. I retreated to our bedroom, hoping for some peace. Instead, unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. My return home was supposed to bring joy and reunion. Instead, it had become a battlefield of unspoken grievances and cold distance. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, waiting for Derek to come to bed. Hours passed, but he never did. The silence between us grew louder, punctuating the vast space that seemed impossible to cross. I knew I had to find out what was happening. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of secrets and schemes I'd never imagined. The next morning, I tried to shake off the cold exchange with Derek. I wanted to make the house feel more like home again, even if his warmth was missing. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Derek finally came downstairs looking groggy. Coffee? I offered with a smile, trying to bridge the distance. Sure, he muttered, plopping down at the table and grabbing his phone immediately. I clenched my jaw but kept my composure. As we ate in relative silence, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his face before he walked out to take the call. The one-sided conversation floated back to me. Yeah, Mom, I know. I'll talk to her, he said, his voice low but firm. Just let me handle it. He returned, shoving his phone into his pocket. I decided to probe gently. Was that your mom? Everything all right? Fine, he answered curtly. She just wants us to join her for a family vacation. Oh? I said, genuinely surprised. When? Next week, he replied without looking at me. She thinks it'll be good for us. You know, spending some time together. A family vacation with Nancy sounded like a nightmare, but I saw it as an opportunity to mend things with Derek. Okay, I guess a break might be a good idea. Good, Derek said, finally looking up at me. She'll be happy to hear that. Determined to make the best of it, I spent the day tidying up the house, hoping to create a warm environment. Throughout the day, Derek remained glued to his phone, his distant demeanor casting a shadow over any moment of hope I felt. In the evening, Derek was on another call. From the kitchen, I overheard his tense conversation. "I told you, Mom, I've got it under control," he hissed. "Why do you need to meddle in everything?" Her reply was indistinct, but her sharp tone was unmistakable. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, fine. I'll talk to her about it." As he hung up, I walked in. "More plans for the trip?" He looked startled, but quickly masked it. "Yeah, just some details. Nothing for you to worry about." "All right," I replied, though his secrecy gnawed at me. "Do you need help with anything?" "No, I'm handling it," he said firmly. "Just focus on packing and getting everything ready." I nodded, but the unease didn't fade. His constant dodging and secretive calls with Nancy made my skin crawl. Despite my efforts to connect, it felt like he was hiding something. Later, alone in our room, I called my brother Richard. "Hey, can you talk?" "Of course," Richard's warm voice replied. "What's up?" I filled him in on Derek's coldness and the mysterious vacation suddenly planned by Nancy. "Sounds sketchy, Dana," Richard said bluntly. "You need a backup plan. In case something feels off, you should have a way out." "You're right," I agreed, feeling a small sense of relief having someone on my side. "I'll make sure I have everything I might need." "Good," he said firmly. "Don't let them catch you off guard." The conversation left me feeling both anxious and determined. Something was definitely off, and I needed to stay alert. As I lay in bed that night, Derek's back turned to me. I steeled myself for whatever was ahead. The following days were filled with Derek's ongoing cold distance and more secretive phone calls. The preparations for the trip felt like they were leading to something climactic, an unshakable tension brewing beneath the surface. I could feel the storm coming, and I knew I had to be ready for it. The week passed quickly with preparations for the trip. I began to pick up on the strange requests. Derek insisted that I handle all the travel arrangements, which seemed odd since he usually preferred to take charge. Regardless, I booked the flights and hotel, hoping it was a step toward reconnecting. One evening, as I was packing, I overheard Derek on another call with Nancy. Their voices were low, but the tension was clear. "Make sure she doesn't suspect anything," Nancy's voice crackled through the door. "The switch has to be smooth. No mistakes." "I know, Mom," Derek replied, exasperated. "I've got everything lined up. No coming back from this." Chills ran down my spine. No coming back? I pretended not to hear as I continued to pack, but my mind raced. What were they planning? The next day, Derek's behavior was erratic. He was overly helpful, offering suggestions on what I should pack and checklists to follow. Normally, I would appreciate it, but given the context of his recent conversations, it only heightened my distrust. "Need any help with the bags?" he asked, poking his head into the bedroom. "No, I've got it," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm almost done." "Great," he replied, his tone unusually chipper. "I'll go check on things downstairs." As he left, I decided to take Richard's advice to heart. I stashed a backup plan in one of my concealed pockets, a spare passport, some cash, and a burner phone, just in case things went south. Later in the day, I walked in on another one of Derek's private conversations. He was in the kitchen, whispering intensely into his phone. "Listen, I don't care what she thinks," he snapped. "We just need to get through this trip, and it'll all be over." I cleared my throat, and Derek jumped, quickly ending his call. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile, "just finalizing some details for our trip." "Who were you talking to?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Just work stuff," he answered too quickly. "Nothing to worry about." My skepticism must have shown because Derek quickly added, "I promise, Dana, this trip is going to be good for us." I murmured, nodding slowly. That night, as I finished up last-minute details, Derek looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, it's been a while since we've done this. Just us and family time. I think it'll help us reset." "Maybe," I replied cautiously, still on edge from everything overheard. As we prepared to leave the following morning, the tension between us palpable. I kept my guard up. Derek's uncharacteristic cheerfulness seemed forced, and the words I had overheard echoed in my mind. At the airport, Derek insisted on keeping all travel documents, another uncharacteristic move. "Let me handle these," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. You've done enough planning. All right, I agreed, albeit reluctantly, making sure to keep my hidden stash close. We flew through the first leg of our journey without much conversation. Derek's constant checking of his phone only added to my anxiety. During our layover, I caught a quick exchange between him and Nancy. Everything set? Nancy asked, her tone strict. Yeah, everything's in place, Derek replied, nodding slightly. I pretended not to hear, but my stomach churned with unease. Finally, we boarded the next flight. Derek's demeanor shifted between tense and strangely upbeat. I feigned interest in a book, but my mind raced with suspicions. Whatever they were planning, I needed to be ready. As we landed and headed towards Nancy's, the ominous feeling grew stronger. The pieces were falling into place, and I was right in the middle of their game. Little did they know, I had my own cards to play. That night, the tension in the air could have been cut with a knife. We were staying at Nancy's house for a night before heading to our final destination. I hoped to talk to Derek and address the obvious strain in our relationship once and for all. After dinner, I found Derek sitting on the porch, staring into the night. I joined him, taking a deep breath. We need to talk, Derek. He sighed but didn't look at me. What about? About us, I said softly. You've been distant, and I need to understand why. You don't want to hear it, he muttered, a dark edge to his voice. Yes, I do, I insisted. I need to know what's going on. You've seemed so different. He finally turned to me, his eyes cold. Different? I've had to handle everything while you've been gallivanting across the globe for your career. Do you even realize how hard that's been? His accusation stung, but I held my ground. I was working, Derek. For us. You knew how important this job was to me. And what about my needs? He snapped. What about our family? You've been so caught up in your work, you couldn't see what was happening right in front of you. What do you mean by that? I demanded, my voice rising. Forget it, he said, standing up abruptly. You wouldn't understand. His evasiveness only fueled my suspicion. Derek, if there's something wrong, we need to talk about it. Secrets are tearing us apart. He spun around, anger flaring in his eyes. Secrets? Yes, there are secrets, Dana. Ones you'll wish you never found out. Before I could respond, he stormed back inside, leaving me in stunned silence. The next morning, the tension had not abated. I was on edge, trying to decipher Derek's cryptic words from the night before. We had breakfast in strained silence, Nancy watching us with an unsettling smile. Ready for the trip? Nancy asked, her tone dripping with false cheerfulness. I forced a nod. Yeah, all set. Good, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing my every move. This will be good for all of us. As we packed up the car, Nancy pulled Derek aside. Their whispered conversation seemed intense, though I couldn't hear the words. Finally, we hit the road. Derek's driving was tense, knuckles white on the steering wheel. We were en route to a remote cabin that Nancy owned, far from any neighbors or help. My sense of unease grew with each passing mile. Once we arrived, the isolation of the cabin sank in. It was picturesque, but felt like a trap. That night, as we settled in, I tried once more to bridge the gap with Derek. Can we just talk? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed heavily. Dana, the talking won't change anything. It might if we actually communicate, I urged. Please, just tell me what's really going on. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and something else, something almost like regret. I'm done talking. You should get some rest. His dismissal was like a punch to the gut, leaving me reeling. I retreated to the bedroom, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was planned. Derek's cryptic words and distant behavior only confirmed my fears. As I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I knew I was on my own. All the signs pointed to an imminent betrayal. I needed to be ready for anything. I clutched my hidden stash, feeling a surge of determination. The storm was closer than ever, and I was bracing for impact. We arrived at Nancy's house with an eerie sense of foreboding. Nancy was unnaturally cheerful, flashing a broad smile as she welcomed us into her home. Dana, dear, so glad you could make it, she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. Her embrace felt more like a constriction, as if testing my resolve. Thanks, Nancy. It's good to be here, I lied. Why don't you rest for a bit while I chat with Derek? Nancy suggested, her smile thin and calculated. I nodded, retreating to the guest room to unpack. The walls seemed to close in, each tick of the clock magnifying the sense of impending doom. Out of habit, I checked my hidden stash again, reassured by its presence. The door creaked open, and Derek stepped inside, looking worn out. "Dana, can you bring the suitcase to the living room? Mom wants to organize everything for the trip." "Sure," I said, grabbing the suitcase and following him. In the living room, Nancy was waiting by the fireplace, her eyes glittering with an almost malevolent glee. As I placed the suitcase down, she produced what looked like my passport from her pocket. "Dana, it's such a shame you didn't stick around," she began, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "But it's time we brought you back to reality." With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the passport into the fire. The flames quickly consumed it, turning it to ashes. I stood there, my heart racing, but my face feigning shock. "What are you doing?" I demanded, forcing my voice to quiver with disbelief. "Didn't you realize, Dana?" Nancy said smugly. "You're not going anywhere. You're trapped here." Derek's silence only added to the betrayal I felt. He glanced at me, a conflicted look in his eyes, but remained silent. I clenched my fists, maintaining my composure. "I can't believe you would do this," I shouted, more for effect than anything. Nancy laughed, the sound biting and cold. "Oh, I'd believe it if I were you. You see, you've been a thorn in our side for too long. Your little adventure ends now." She turned to Derek. "Any last words for your wife?" Derek hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I'm sorry, Dana, but this is the way it has to be." My mind raced. This was the moment I had prepared for. "One thing you forgot, Nancy," I said, my voice growing steadier. "You could never outsmart a linguist." Nancy's smug expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the real passport, holding it up for them to see. "What you burned was a decoy, just like your plan." Derek's eyes widened, and Nancy's face contorted into a mask of rage. "You—" "I knew something was off," I interrupted. "You underestimated me, but now the tables have turned." Nancy's fury reached a boiling point. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." I stepped forward, my confidence growing. "Whatever it is, I'll be ready. You won't trap me or manipulate me anymore." Derek looked between us, the realization of his failure sinking in. "Dana, you don't understand." "Save it," I cut him off. "I'm done listening to excuses and lies." With that, I walked out of the living room, my heart pounding. The adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me the strength I needed to leave behind the toxic deceit of Derek and Nancy. I clutched my real passport tightly, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready for it. As I stepped outside, the fresh air filled my lungs, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere I had left behind. I knew this was just the beginning of my unburnt vengeance. I didn't get far before Derek caught up to me just outside the house. He grabbed my arm, a look of frantic desperation in his eyes. "Dana, stop. We need to talk." "I've heard enough, Derek," I said, jerking my arm away. "I know everything." "You don't know the full story," he pleaded. "Mom pushed me into this. It was all her idea." Nancy followed him out, her eyes blazing with anger. "Don't you dare blame this on me, Derek," she snapped. "You went along with it willingly." "Enough," I said, raising my voice. "I don't care whose idea it was. You both tried to trap me, and now you're going to face the consequences." Nancy laughed, her voice dripping with malice. "Consequences? What are you going to do, Dana? Run to the police? No one will believe you. They'll think you're just a bitter wife." I took out my phone, holding it up for them to see. "Actually, Nancy, I have a different plan." Nancy's smug expression faltered. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the screen, playing back the recording of their entire conversation from earlier. Their voices echoed through the air, every incriminating word crystal clear. Derek's face went pale, and Nancy's anger turned to panic. "You recorded us?" Derek gasped. "How could you?" "I knew something was off the moment we planned this trip," I said, "so I made sure to cover all my bases." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "You won't get away with this, Dana. We'll deny everything. This recording won't hold up." "Maybe," I conceded, "but it won't need to. I'm sending this to everyone we know, your friends, your family, your colleagues." Nancy lunged at me, but I sidestepped her easily. "Stay away from me," I warned, my voice cold. "You've lost." Derek looked defeated, his shoulders slumping. "Dana, please, we can work something out. Just delete the recording." "You should have thought of that before trying to ruin my life," I retorted. "It's too late for second chances." As I walked away, I sent the recording to a group email I had prepared, ensuring it reached everyone who mattered. Derek and Nancy's schemes were about to be exposed, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Behind me, I heard the panic in Nancy's voice as she realized the gravity of their situation. "You've ruined us," she screamed. "Everything we built, gone because of you." I didn't look back. The weight of their betrayal was lifted with each step I took away from their toxic grasp. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to forge, free from their manipulation. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with responses from those who had received the recording. Words of support, shock, and disgust filled the screen. I knew this was just the beginning of the fallout, but it was a necessary step to reclaim my life. I started the engine and drove off, leaving the wreckage of betrayal behind. Derek and Nancy would face the consequences of their actions, and I had no intention of letting them drag me down any further. As I merged onto the highway, the horizon ahead seemed brighter, the weight of revenge turning into the freedom I had longed for. The fight wasn't over, but for now, I had won. I drove back to our house, my mind racing with the gravity of everything that had happened. Once inside, I wasted no time. I gathered my essentials and started making calls to arrange my immediate departure. My brother Richard was the first to pick up. "Dana, what's going on?" Richard's voice came through, concerned. "Richard, I need your help. I'm leaving Derek." Their plan was vile beyond words, and I've had enough, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Tell me what you need," he replied without hesitation. "Meet me at our place in 2 hours. I need to finalize a few things and then we're getting out of here," I said. "Got it. I'll be there," Richard replied, hanging up. I went through the house, systematically packing important documents, my laptop, and personal items. A sense of finality washed over me. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I zipped up my suitcase, I received a flurry of texts and calls from people who had received the recording. The responses varied from shock to solidarity, but one thing was clear. Derek and Nancy's reputations were burning to the ground. Just then, the front door burst open. Derek stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "Dana, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Leaving," I said simply, my eyes cold. "I've had enough of your lies and schemes." "You can't just walk away," he shouted, stepping closer. "We can fix this. Just delete the recording, and we can start over." "There's nothing left to fix," I replied, standing my ground. "Your actions have consequences, Derek. It's time you face them." Nancy barged in right behind him, her face livid. "You think you've won, Dana? This isn't over. I will destroy you for what you've done." "You did this to yourself," I said calmly. "I'm simply making sure everyone sees you for what you really are." "You'll regret this," Nancy spat. "You and your entire family." Ignoring her threats, I walked past them to the door. "Stay away from me," I warned, "or you'll regret it." I stepped outside to find Richard already waiting by his car. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I nodded, getting into his car. We pulled away, leaving behind the toxic wreckage of my former life. As we drove, Richard reached over and patted my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Dana. You deserve so much better than what they put you through." "I know," I replied, staring out the window as the scenery blurred past. "And now I'm going to make sure they never do this to anyone else." Once we reached his place, I finalized the arrangements to send the evidence to key family members and friends. The fallout was immediate. Derek and Nancy's inner circle was in uproar, their deception laid bare. My phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls. Some family members were in shock, others offered their support. The media picked up the story, adding another layer of public humiliation for Derek and Nancy. Their carefully constructed image was crumbling faster than they could contain it. In the midst of the chaos, I booked a one-way ticket out of town. A new city, a fresh start. Richard drove me to the airport, offering a final hug of support as I prepared to board. "Call me when you land," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will," I promised, feeling a mixture of sorrow and relief as I walked away. As the plane ascended, I felt lighter, the burden of betrayal lifting with each mile. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next. Derek and Nancy's reign of deceit was over, and I was finally free to start anew. I landed in the new city with a mix of apprehension and excitement. It was time to start fresh. As I walked through the bustling airport, each step felt like a deliberate move away from the past. Richard had thoughtfully arranged for a car to pick me up. The driver, a young woman with bright eyes, greeted me warmly. "Welcome. Need help with your luggage?" she asked, her smile genuine. "Thanks, that would be great," I responded, handing her my bags. I climbed into the back seat, hoping the city would provide the refuge I needed. The drive through the city was both unfamiliar and comforting. New buildings, new faces, new beginnings. I found solace in the thought that I could reinvent myself here, free from Derek and Nancy's shadow. I arrived at my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom with just enough space to feel like home. As I unpacked, I felt a sense of liberation. Each item placed felt like an anchor dropped in safe waters. By evening, I had the essentials sorted and took a moment to breathe. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. The next few days were a blur of activity, setting up utilities, getting groceries, familiarizing myself with my surroundings. Despite the initial rush, a sense of peace settled over me. I opened my laptop and checked my emails, finding more messages of support from friends and family. Derek and Nancy's scandal had spread like wildfire, and their reputations were irreparably damaged. One email, however, caught my attention. It was from Tom, Derek's estranged father, who had been unaware of the plot. "Dana, I am so sorry for what my wife and son did to you. I had no idea. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. You don't deserve this." I replied quickly. "Thank you, Tom. Your support means a lot. I'm starting fresh, and your words help in ways you can't imagine." Just as I hit send, my phone rang. It was Richard checking in. "How's the new place?" "Feels like the haven I needed," I said, smiling. "Glad to hear it, sis. Remember, you always have a place here if you need it." "I know. Thanks, Richard, for everything." After the call, I decided to explore the neighborhood. I found a quaint coffee shop a few blocks away and decided to treat myself. As I sat there, sipping my latte, I felt a sense of normalcy returning. The barista noticed my contemplative mood. "New in town?" he asked, wiping down the counter. "Yeah, just moved here, trying to get my bearings." "Well, welcome. This is a great place to start over." "Thanks," I said, appreciating the simple kindness in his words. Days turned into weeks, and I slowly built a new routine. I found a job at a local language school, teaching linguistics. The work was fulfilling, and my colleagues were welcoming. It was a far cry from the toxic environment I had left behind. One evening, as I was grading papers, an unexpected call came through. It was from a private number. Hesitant, I answered, "Dana, it's Derek." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm truly sorry for what happened." I took a deep breath. "Apology accepted, Derek, but it changes nothing." "I know. Just take care," he said, his voice filled with regret. "You too. Goodbye, Derek." Clicking off the call, I realized I felt no sadness, no lingering attachment, just relief. I was finally free. As the days turned into months, I embraced my new life. I thrived in my teaching role and made new friends. Each day felt like a step further away from the shadows of my past. On a warm spring evening, with the city lights twinkling outside my window, I planned my next adventure. I knew my journey was far from over, but now it was on my terms. I was no longer Dana, the woman tied down by deceit and betrayal. I was Dana, the linguist, the traveler, the woman who reclaimed her life. And with each new step, I felt truly free.